On the day of our wedding, my husband's childhood sweetheart threatened to take her own life. He responded coldly, "Let her do as she pleases. My wife can only be Wan Wan." Later, his childhood sweetheart actually died. Holding my hand, he comforted me. "Wan Wan, her death has nothing to do with you." I thought he truly loved me, so I poured my family's resources into helping him rise in power. Yet on the day he succeeded, he cast me aside with a divorce letter, then tortured me to death. Su Wan, if not for you, how would Suyu have died? Do you know how long I've been waiting for this revenge? When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day of our wedding. I had been tortured to death by Gu Fufeng. In the dead of winter, he had me tied up with vines and repeatedly submerged in a pool filled with shards of ice. I trembled uncontrollably, my body numb to the bone. He stood on the shore, hands clasped behind his back, a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes were bloodshot. Perhaps he was thinking of the woman he had lost years ago. "Su Wan, are you cold?" It was winter too when Su died. She must have been so cold, so terrified. A woman like you, being drowned in a pig cage is the only fate you deserve. With a wave of his hand, Gu Fufeng ordered the servants to press me into the water. The icy water engulfed me, flooding my lungs. As excruciating pain tore through me, my heart turned to ice, inch by inch. Even after I died, my soul did not immediately fade away. I saw how Gu Fufeng still wouldn't let me go even after my death. He spread rumors that I was a jealous shrew who drove a concubine to her death, disrespected my elders, and, out of shame and humiliation, drowned myself after being cast aside. By then, Gu Fufeng had become a revered official with an untarnished reputation. People believed every word he said. So the eldest daughter of the Su family was nothing but a vicious woman. With such a disgraceful upbringing, the other Su sisters must be the same. Our family name was utterly ruined. My second sister suffered endless mistreatment from her husband's family. My third sister's engagement was called off. My fourth sister was humiliated at school. Our father, enraged, had a stroke and soon passed away. Mother followed not long after. 10 years ago, Gu Fufeng had knelt before them, his gaze sincere and unwavering. "I wish to marry Su Wan as my wife, to cherish her for a lifetime, never to part." My parents never imagined that the son-in-law they had supported with everything they had was nothing but a venomous snake. With boundless resentment, my soul finally dissipated. Then I opened my eyes again. The warm glow of red candles, festive banners hanging high, the clinking of wine cups. "Big sister, stop spacing out. Brother-in-law is looking at you." My second sister nudged me. I turned to glance at the guest seats. Gu Fufeng, clad in a bright red groom's robe, was mingling with the guests. Noticing my gaze, he turned to look at me and smiled. In that moment, it felt as if a fog had lifted from my mind. I realized I had been reborn. Reborn on the very day of my wedding to Gu Fufeng. The wedding banquet was grand. After all, the Su family was the wealthiest in Jiangnan. If there was anything we didn't lack, it was money. As for Gu Fufeng, though born into poverty, he had recently placed first in the imperial exam. 6 months ago, while traveling to the capital for the exams, he had passed by my family's silk shop and saved me from being harassed by street thugs. To thank him, I gifted him a pair of wolf hair brushes. He used those very brushes to write a brilliant essay during the examination, catching the eye of a senior official and earning the emperor's favor. After securing first place, the first thing he did was return to Jiangnan to ask for my hand in marriage. A talented scholar and a wealthy heiress, everyone believed our union was a match made in heaven. Noticing my daze, Gu Fufeng approached me and whispered, "What's wrong, Wan Wan? Are you feeling unwell? Is it your time of the month? Should I ask someone to make you a bowl of red date ginger tea?" He had always been so considerate. But before he could finish his words, a commotion erupted in the front hall. A woman had barged in. Dressed in a light-colored gown, she was frail in stature, her pale face streaked with tears. The servant by Gu Fufeng's side gasped in shock. "Miss Biao *, why are you here?" Asterisk Miss Biao, a term referring to a female cousin from the paternal side. The woman, addressed as Miss Biao, walked up to me in a panic. She knelt down and presented me with a cup of tea. Madam. The entire hall fell silent in astonishment. I gazed at the pitiful woman before me. Her name was Su Yu, Gu Fufeng's cousin. In my past life, she had done the same thing, interrupting my wedding banquet. She had knelt before me, offering tea and calling me madam. In my country, this was the ritual for accepting a concubine. In my past life, Gu Fufeng had scolded Su Yu, ordering the servants to remove her. Then he had turned to me and said, "My cousin is ignorant of proper etiquette. Don't take her words to heart." Afterward, he held my hand before my parents, solemnly declaring that he had no intention of taking concubines and would devote himself entirely to me. Though my parents were displeased by the disruption, they were reassured by his unwavering stance and let the matter drop. Later, I married Gu Fufeng, and the Su family spared no effort in supporting him. Whenever he needed to bribe officials, my family procured rare treasures to pave his way in court. When the emperor sent him to suppress bandits, my father funded the campaign, and my younger brother risked his life infiltrating the enemy's ranks as an informant. With our backing, Gu Fufeng climbed higher and higher, yet we never complained. To my family, his success meant my happiness. The year he was granted a noble title, Su Yu was found dead in a secluded courtyard of his estate. They said she had drowned herself in despair. Gu Fufeng provided silver for her burial and consoled me. Wan, her death has nothing to do with you. Don't blame yourself. But in truth, he had lied to me. He claimed I was blameless only because he still needed my family's support. Once he had risen to the peak of power and no longer needed us, he had me drowned in a pig cage and humiliated my entire family with a divorce letter. Only then did I realize how deeply he had loved Su Yu all along. Now, Su Yu knelt before me once more, weeping as she pleaded. My cousin and I grew up together. We were once engaged. But after my father was exiled for his crimes, our engagement was annulled. I know I am no longer worthy of my cousin. Miss Su is his rightful match. But I have never wished to marry anyone else. I am willing to serve as his concubine. Please, madam, grant me this wish. The moment she finished speaking, the entire hall erupted in shock. The faces of my family members paled. Amidst the silence, Gu Fufeng stepped forward. Snatching the teacup from Su Yu's hands, he smashed it onto the floor. Absurd. Shards of porcelain flew through the air, slicing a gash across Su Yu's face. She trembled in pain but bit her lip, refusing to make a sound. Gu Fufeng shouted, "My family took you in out of pity for your plight, yet you dare have such thoughts. Not to mention, our so-called engagement was nothing more than a jest between elders, never something to be taken seriously. And now Wan and I have just married, yet you come to our wedding to pressure her? Utterly ridiculous." After finishing, Gu Fufeng coldly ordered the servant, "The young lady has lost her mind. Take her out." The servant obeyed, stepping forward and saying to Su Yu, "Come, young lady." With her lashes lowered, Su Yu let her tears fall as she was dragged away, looking utterly broken. Gu Fufeng then took my hand and led me to my family. Just like in my past life, he began making grand promises about how well he would treat me in the future. I stood beside him, watching coldly. His hands were trembling slightly. As he drank, his gaze kept drifting toward the doorway, though there was nothing to see. That was the direction Su Yu had left.
He was worried about her.
The red candles burned, their wax dripping like silent tears. When the guests had all departed, only Gu Fufeng and I remained in the bridal chamber. He took my hand. Without a word, I withdrew my hand from his grasp. The time should be just about right. Sure enough, before Gu Fufeng could react, a servant's urgent voice rang from outside. "Young master, something terrible has happened." Gu Fufeng scowled. "Tonight is my wedding night. What could possibly be so urgent that it can't wait until tomorrow?" The servant, gasping for breath from running, stammered, "The young lady, she She jumped into the lake to kill herself. I saw Gu Fufeng shoot to his feet, his entire body taut. Is she dead? No, the servant panted. Luckily, a passing old woman saved her, but she's still in a terrible state. Young master, perhaps you should go check on her. Seated on the bridal bed, I silently watched Gu Fufeng. He was trembling from head to toe, worry consuming him. But just moments later, he forced himself to calm down, his expression hardening into one of indifference and disdain. With an icy tone, he said, "Tonight is my wedding night with Wanwan. I won't go. If she wants to throw a tantrum, let her." Internally, I marveled. Gu Fufeng truly was a man who could achieve great things. With such restraint, such an impeccable performance, no wonder I fell for him in my past life. But now that I had been reborn, I would not make the same mistake again. Just as Gu Fufeng turned back to me, trying to resume our wedding night, I suddenly stood up. "Where is my cousin? I want to see her." It was late, and the lakeside was freezing. Gu Fufeng kept trying to stop me, but he couldn't hold me back. When I reached the lake, Su Yu was sitting on the shore, drenched and pitiful. Gu Fufeng clearly didn't want me speaking with her, so he rushed ahead of me and scolded. "How could you do something so reckless? If you want to die, so be it, but how could you ruin Wanwan's wedding night? How could you burden her with this?" His words seemed to be for my sake, yet his eyes were red with anguish. Su Yu said nothing, only sobbed. Gu Fufeng sighed deeply, then turned to me. "Wanwan, she is still family. Let me speak to her. You should head back first. Don't worry, I'll handle things properly in the future, so you won't have to concern yourself with this." Watching his gentle, considered act, I smiled. "All right then. I'll leave my cousin in your care." With that, I took my maid's hand and left. Or, at least, I pretended to leave. Taking a different path, I circled back and hid behind a lakeside rock, listening to their conversation. Gu Fufeng's voice was both pained and scolding. "I told you to wait for me at home. Why did you come here on your own?" Su Yu sobbed pitifully. "I missed you too much, Brother Fufeng. I traveled all the way to Jiangnan, only to hear the moment I arrived that you were marrying the eldest daughter of the Su family. I panicked and rushed into the wedding. Brother Fufeng, have you abandoned me? If you don't want me anymore, what am I supposed to do?" Gu Fufeng pulled Su Yu into his arms, speaking softly. "Silly you are. How could I ever abandon you? But I have no choice. I must marry Su Wan."
You know why.
When my father was stripped of his title by the emperor, our family fell into ruin. I am our only hope now. Even though I ranked first in the imperial exam, I have no backing at court. The Su family is my best chance." Su Yu murmured in confusion. "But the Su family is just a merchant family. Merchants are lowly, yes, but not the Su family," Gu Fufeng said gravely. "When the Qiangrong tribes invaded, the late emperor fled south, and the Su family provided enormous military funds. In gratitude, the emperor granted them the title of imperial merchants for generations. Not only that, but back then, the Su family's daughter was deeply loved by the crown prince. And that woman, now the most favored concubine in the palace, is Su Wan's own aunt, Consort Shu. The court is deeply divided by factional strife. Aligning with one side means making enemies of the other. But the Su family, far away in Jiangnan, is respected by both factions. Do you understand now, Yue? Marrying a princess would only make me a fifth-rank consort prince. But marrying Su Wan could make me a grand chancellor." A chill ran through me. I almost wanted to applaud him. What a plan. What a perfect scheme. Yue, you are my one true love. You were with me through my hardest days. I could never make you a concubine. When I rise to power, I will divorce Su Wan. You will be my only wife." Now, I understood everything.
Completely.
In my past life, Su Yu died just after Gu Fufeng was granted a marquis title. At that time, his position was still unstable. He couldn't discard me immediately. But Su Yu couldn't wait. So, she had someone deliver news of her death to Gu Fufeng. Gu Fufeng lost his mind. He hated me to the bone. For years, he endured and plotted, eventually tormenting me to death. And just as I died, Suyu had someone inform Gu Fufeng that her death had been faked, that she was still alive. At last, these star-crossed lovers were reunited. Even now, Gu Fufeng was still reassuring Suyu. "You just wait for me. A few years at most, a decade at worst. I will keep my promise and marry you openly." I shook my head. 10 years was far too long. I would help reunite these two lovebirds right now. When Gu Fufeng returned to the bridal chamber, he was met with my solemn expression. I curtsied and saluted him. "Husband, I have a request." Gu Fufeng was startled and hurriedly helped me up. "Wan, just say it. Even if I have to walk through fire and blades, I will do it for you." I looked up at him, my gaze firm. "Husband, please take my cousin as a concubine." Gu Fufeng was stunned. After a moment, he frantically waved his hand. "Wan, that's absolutely impossible. Not to mention that I've already promised father-in-law and mother-in-law to be faithful to you alone for life. I have no romantic feelings for Suyu at all. From the moment I saved you in front of the silk shop, I already knew you are the only one in my heart." I interrupted him. "Husband, you may be heartless to Miss Suyu, but I cannot be unrighteous. A life is at stake. I cannot stand by and do nothing. Besides, as a fellow woman, I understand her deep affection for you. She bravely crashed our wedding banquet yesterday, and all she asks is to be a concubine. That is not an excessive request. Why refuse?" Gu Fufeng still wanted to object, but I cut him off again. "Husband, don't worry. Treat this as saving a life. As for whether you will actually favor her afterward, that is your business. I will not interfere." Hearing this, Gu Fufeng could no longer argue. He could only respond dryly. "Wan, rest assured, I will not favor her." Who would believe that? I sneered inwardly, but only smiled on the surface. "It's late. Let's sleep." After such a long night, dawn was near, and neither of us had the mood to consummate our marriage. That suited me perfectly. After everything I experienced in my past life, being intimate with Gu Fufeng again would be nothing short of torture. The next morning, Gu Fufeng woke up, seemingly wanting to make up for last night, and leaned in to cuddle me. But I had already jumped out of bed. "Chunshu, Xiaoliu, help me freshen up, and have the servant prepare a sedan. We're going to pick up Miss Suyu." Before me stood a delicate beauty, arched brows, almond-shaped eyes, her face like a dewdrop on a lotus. I sighed. Miss Suyu is so lovely, truly pitiable. Why not let me decide today and grant her as a concubine to my husband? Suyu's head snapped up, her face full of panic. Yesterday's dramatic gesture was just a tactic to retreat in order to advance, making Gu Fufeng cherish her more. She never actually wanted to be a concubine. After all, according to our customs, even if the main wife was divorced or passed away, the husband would marry a new wife, never elevate a concubine to that position. If she was officially labeled as a concubine, she would never have a chance to become Gu Fufeng's rightful wife. So Suyu quickly teared up and softly said, "I was indeed infatuated with cousin before, but after seeing how affectionate he is with Miss Su yesterday, I now understand that he only has her in his heart. How could I interfere? I have already given up my foolish hopes." Gu Fufeng, sitting to the side, discreetly breathed a sigh of relief, seemingly pleased with Suyu's quick wit. I smiled gently. "Miss Suyu, have you truly let go of your past feelings?" Suyu lowered her gaze. "I have." "That's wonderful." I clapped my hands. "In that case, as your elder sister-in-law, I will arrange a good marriage for you." At these words, both Gu Fufeng and Suyu turned pale. Gu Fufeng managed to keep his composure, but Suyu blurted out in alarm, "No!" She immediately realized her mistake and covered her mouth, but it was too late. I smiled leisurely.
"See?
How could someone who has loved for over 10 years let go so easily? Clearly, Miss Suyu still loves my husband and refuses to marry another. In that case, I must fulfill her wish. Don't worry, I am the eldest daughter of the Su family, raised with proper etiquette. Jealousy is one of the 7 grounds for divorce. I would never commit such an offense. I will certainly get along well with Sister Suyu. Suyu looked at Gu Fufeng in desperation. Gu Fufeng signaled her with his eyes. She must refuse, no matter what. This was absolutely unacceptable. Not only would Suyu lose all possibility of becoming his wife if she became a concubine, but for Gu Fufeng, taking a concubine right after marrying his main wife would anger the Su family. Their clan would no longer fully support him. Seeing Gu Fufeng's expression, Suyu regained her confidence. She took a deep breath and said firmly, "I appreciate Miss Su's kindness. But I have made up my mind. I will not become my cousin's concubine." She spoke decisively. If I continued to persuade her, it would be as if I were forcing an innocent woman. I gracefully stood up and smiled warmly. I only meant well. Since Miss Suyu is unwilling, I certainly won't insist. Husband, let's go. As I stood up to leave, I deliberately twisted my ankle. Gu Fufeng immediately reached out to support me. Suppressing my disgust, I clung to his arm and playfully said, "I think my ankle will swell. Guling, could you help me apply some medicinal oil?" Having just dealt with the ordeal with Suyu, Gu Fufeng had been on edge all morning. Now that he had a chance to please me, he eagerly agreed. Of course. In the courtyard, he carefully applied the ointment, an intimate and tender scene. I glanced toward the side and, as expected, saw Suyu standing at her window, staring at us with a dark expression. I smiled inwardly. I exchanged a glance with Chuanxiu and Xiaoliu. They immediately understood. "We will fetch some tea for Mississippi." Of course, they didn't actually go to fetch tea. Instead, they lingered near Suyu's room, idly chatting. Chuanxiu sighed. "Hey, did you hear? That Miss Lu from the east side of the city, who is poor and sick, cried out in pain all night and passed away this morning." Xiaoliu gasped. How tragic. Didn't she have a childhood sweetheart cousin who promised to marry her? I heard he's an official in the capital. Chuanxiu shook her head. What use is a childhood sweetheart? That cousin married a noble lady in the capital and hasn't seen Miss Lu in years. Eventually, he just forgot about her. Xiaoliu sighed. Miss Lu was too foolish. She waited just because he told her to, giving him all the power in their relationship. If she had insisted on following him to the capital with her beauty and wit, even if she couldn't become his wife, she could have been a favored concubine, living in luxury. She wouldn't have ended up dying in misery like this. Inside the room, there was a sudden crash, the sound of a teacup shattering. Chuanxiu and Xiaoliu exchanged a glance and silently withdrew. When they returned to me, they gave me a knowing look. I understood immediately. I wanted Suyu to hear those words, and now she had. So, Suyu, do you dare to gamble? Do you dare to bet that Gu Fufeng's love for you will never change, as eternal as the mountains and seas? I smirked. I bet you don't. Otherwise, why would you repeatedly crash the wedding banquet, fake your death, and pull every trick in the book? Sure enough, just as Gu Fufeng and I were about to leave, Suyu suddenly rushed out of the private room. She ran up to us, knelt down, and bowed deeply. "Dear cousin, I regret it. I only wish to stay by your side. I ask for nothing else, not even a title." Then, she turned to me and pleaded, "Madam, please grant me this wish." Gu Fufeng's face turned deathly pale. I, on the other hand, had to use all my strength to keep from laughing. Soon enough, rumors spread across the capital. Gu Fufeng had taken a concubine the day after marrying his wife. Even the Grand Secretary, who had originally held him in high regard, shook his head and sighed when he heard the news. I once thought Gu Fufeng, though born poor, was brilliant in both scholarship and ability. I even considered taking him in as my last disciple. But who knew he would be so frivolous? As for me, I was met with waves of sympathy. The Su family married their eldest daughter into the Gu family, making a clear sacrifice in status. All they wanted was for their daughter to live in peace, with a harmonious marriage. And yet, what does Gu Fufeng do? He marries a noble lady, then takes a concubine the very next day. Could it be that the concubine is already pregnant, forcing his hand. Gu Fufeng had no way to defend himself. All he could do was beg me. My wife, rumors are spreading like wildfire. Can you clear this up for me? I sipped my tea and sighed softly. My dear husband, it's not that I don't want to help you, but as the saying goes, the innocent remain innocent. If you protest too much, you'll only make it worse. In my past life, Gu Fufeng had used these very words against me. Su Yu had clearly thrown herself into the well, yet the world believed I had forced her to her death. I begged Gu Fufeng to speak up for me, but he merely said, "The innocent remain innocent. If you say too much, it only makes things worse." Only later did I discover that he was the one who had spread the rumors in the first place. Then, after he killed me, he sent a divorce letter to my family listing 3 damning accusations: barren and childless, unfilial to my in-laws, and overwhelmingly jealous, all crimes worthy of being cast out. Because of me, my entire family suffered. In a society where a family's reputation was tied together, my 3 younger sisters' futures were utterly ruined. Reputation is a deadly weapon. Gu Fufeng knew exactly how to wield it against me. Even though I had been reborn, this weapon still hung over my head. If I divorced or annulled the marriage too hastily, my reputation would be ruined, and my sister's chances at good marriages would be destroyed. But that was fine. I could use this same weapon against Gu Fufeng. Soon, it was time for Gu Fufeng to return to the capital for his new position. After arriving in the city, I had word spread that I had fallen ill from exhaustion after the long journey and would be unable to fulfill my marital duties for several months. I had already placed a spy among Su Yu's servants. It wasn't long before a maid came sneaking over to see me. Smiling, I picked up a piece of candied ginger and asked, how did she react when she heard the news? The maid whispered, she was overjoyed. She started bathing and dressing up from noon onward, changing her clothes multiple times. She even had the nanny apply a pear blossom makeup style, saying it's the master's favorite. I chuckled. No wonder she was so delighted. Being a concubine was far from ideal, but at least she wouldn't have to endure over a decade of loneliness, waiting in vain. Now, she could openly stay by Gu Fufeng's side, and heaven seemed to be helping her. I, as the main wife, was sick upon arrival, and the master couldn't spend the night alone. Naturally, his only concubine would take my place. If she could seize this chance to get pregnant and bear the eldest son, coupled with Gu Fufeng's favor, she could stand on equal footing with me. She would never have to fear me again. I smiled at the maid. Aren't there many methods in the capital to enhance pleasure and fertility? Incense, medicine.
Let her know about them.
I'm sure she'll be even happier. The maid nodded and left. Sure enough, that afternoon, Su Yu's servant boy slipped out and returned with a package of medicine. Soon after, the scent of herbal decoction filled her courtyard. The fertility medicine was ready. The pear blossom makeup was perfect. Everything was in place. All she had to do was wait for Gu Fufeng to arrive with joy in her heart. But as the moon rose above the willow branches, I leaned lazily on a cushion and said to the man before me, "Husband, if you stay here, I won't be able to serve you properly." Gu Fufeng leaned closer and fed me a spoonful of bird's nest soup. "No matter. Then I shall serve you instead." His gaze was gentle, my smile charming. Anyone watching would think we were the most affectionate couple. I sipped the soup from his hand and silently counted the time. Someone must be losing their mind by now. Sure enough, moments later, one of Su Yu's maids rushed in. Her face was red and swollen, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Master, it's bad." Mistress Su suddenly felt severe palpitations. "She's in terrible pain. Please, you must come at once." Gu Fufeng's temple throbbed. He stood up and gritted his teeth. "If she's unwell, then call a doctor. Why are you coming to me?" I sat to the side, dabbing my lips with a silk handkerchief, hiding a faint, indifferent smile. Gu Fufeng didn't know. Su Yu had been overjoyed, making so many preparations, all in anticipation of his visit. Yet, instead of going to her, he chose to stay by my side, even knowing I could not fulfill my marital duties. For Suyu, this was a devastating blow, enough to drive her mad. And she had no idea that from the moment Gu Fufeng set foot in the capital, I had spread the rumor that he had taken a concubine right after marriage. The entire city was gossiping about how he favored his mistress over his wife. At a time like this, even with my illness, he couldn't risk making the rumors worse by visiting Suyu first. I had calculated all of this. I let her be filled with joy and expectation, only to crush her with cold reality. A woman who could throw herself into a lake multiple times would not hesitate to go to extremes when driven mad. Sure enough, before the first maid could even finish speaking, another servant rushed in. Master. Mistress Su couldn't take the pain anymore. She just took a broken piece of porcelain and slashed her wrist. There's blood everywhere. She said she won't make it. She only begs to see you one last time. Gu Fufeng could no longer hold himself back. He rushed out the door and ran straight to Siyue's courtyard. I stood up. The moonlight filtered through the lattice window, casting a faint chill on my face. I had already investigated this. Among the medicines the servant delivered to Siyue that afternoon, there were both fertility enhancers and aphrodisiacs. As long as Gu Fufeng went there, she would undoubtedly get what she wanted. And so would I. A few days later, the scandal of the newly appointed top scholar, Gu Fufeng, spread throughout the capital. It was said that right after his grand wedding and return to the capital, he spent 3 whole days indulging in his concubine's chambers, even taking leave from court. In our dynasty, an official favoring a concubine while neglecting his wife was severely damaging to his reputation. Even the lords of noble households, no matter how much they doted on their concubines, did so in secret, carefully restraining themselves. No one dared to openly disgrace their family's honor. For a time, the young men of the capital made Gu Fufeng the subject of their idle chatter. Have you heard? The top scholar has been staying in his concubine's quarters since arriving in the capital, even taking sick leave from court. Indeed. It's utterly disgraceful. He's embarrassed all of us who passed the imperial examination alongside him. Meanwhile, within the inner courtyards, noble women whispered to their husbands. My lord, did you know that Gu Fufeng's legitimate wife is the eldest daughter of the Su family from Jiangnan? On the very night of their wedding, his favored concubine disrupted the ceremony. It's likely the marriage was never even consummated. Neglecting the wife for the concubine is a grave mistake. Gu Fufeng hasn't even shared a chamber with his legitimate wife, yet he's already showering his concubine with favor, causing such a scandal. His character is truly lacking. My lord, it would be wise to distance yourself from him. And so, Gu Fufeng, who had once been the rising star everyone sought to befriend, became a pariah. His background had never been prestigious, so both in his past life and this one, he had always mingled with the scholarly elite who valued talent over birthright. Yet, while those scholars cared little for lineage, they held reputation in the highest regard. With his name now in ruins, they naturally avoided him. Inside the inner courtyard, I savored a piece of sweet osmanthus cake while listening to the furious outbursts from the front hall, feeling utterly content. In truth, Gu Fufeng was neither a man lost in lust nor one without sense. But there was nothing he could do. Siyue had used an aphrodisiac incense that was far too potent. Of course, she believed she had found the incense maker herself. In reality, I had arranged it for her. As for the details of those circulating rumors, naturally, it was my servants who spread them by frequenting the capital's taverns and letting the gossip flow. Now, Gu Fufeng was in utter distress. No matter how many visiting cards he sent or how many officials' residences he sought an audience with, all doors remained closed to him. And the one responsible for all this misfortune was none other than Siyue. Yet, when Gu Fufeng discovered the aphrodisiac incense and confronted Siyue with it, she fell to her knees, weeping. Cousin, it's true, I used tricks in a moment of desperation. But it was only because I love you too much. Miss Su comes from a noble family, blessed with both talent and beauty. If you were to abandon me for her, what would become of me? She has everything, but I have only you. I was terrified. So I thought, If I could serve you, if I could share even one night of warmth with you, then no matter if you blame me or even wish to kill me, I would have no regrets. She crawled toward him, clutching his hand and guiding it to her belly. Cousin, feel it, he's moving. We have a child. Gu Fufeng, seething with rage, froze upon hearing those words. Suyue pressed her delicate, tear-streaked face against his knee and murmured softly, I only want to bear this child for you. When the time comes, whether Miss Su sells me off or takes my life, I will accept my fate. Gu Fufeng remained silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed and stroked her head. Fool. Outside the window, I had heard everything. Without hesitation, I turned and left. Spring Su and Summer Lu followed, fuming as they whispered, My lady, this is too much. After all she's done to ruin his career, he still cherishes her. I idly traced the red lacquer on my nails and spoke languidly. Gu Fufeng calculates everything and claws his way upward with all his might. But Suyue was someone he knew when he was still lowly and insignificant, perhaps the only sincere bond in his otherwise cold and ruthless life. It's only natural that he can't bear to let her go. Spring Su and Summer Lu still looked indignant, but I waved my handkerchief dismissively.
Enough.
This household has only a few people to begin with. If Gu Fufeng can't bring himself to punish Suyue, he'll surely turn his attention to me next. Rather than fuming, why don't you go light a few incense sticks at the shrine and pray for your mistress's safety? Their expressions changed at once. Muttering Amitabha, they rushed off to the Buddhist hall. I chuckled. If the gods were willing to protect me, that would be best. If not, I had my own ways of ensuring my survival. Calling over a servant, I spoke calmly. Suyue's pregnancy must be well taken care of. Go and invite the best physician in the capital. The doctor who arrived was quite the remarkable man. His complexion was as fair as powdered jade, his lips crimson, and his teeth pearly white. Anyone who saw him would exclaim at his handsomeness. Before everyone, I entrusted this striking doctor with a significant task. This time, I've invited you here first and foremost to ensure Suyue's pregnancy is stable. Whether prescribing medicine or dietary supplements, everything must be the finest and most expensive. If anything is lacking, just tell me. I will cover it with my personal funds. But aside from Suyue, there is another person who will need your daily attention. My husband, Gu Fufeng. I dabbed the corner of my eye with my handkerchief and spoke with concern. With our household now in decline, my husband has been brooding, unable to eat or sleep, growing thinner by the day. It pains me to see him like this. If his health deteriorates further, the future of this household will be even bleaker. So I must trouble you to check his pulse every day and prescribe medicine to nourish him. If his complexion improves, the weight in my heart will finally be lifted. After saying this, I knew my reputation as a virtuous wife was about to spread all over the capital once again. As expected, even when Chun Su and Xia Lu went out just to buy some thread and needles, they could hear people gossiping everywhere. That eldest daughter-in-law of the Gu family, Lady Su, truly is a kind and virtuous woman. Her husband dotes on his concubine and neglects his wife, and the concubine was the first to conceive, yet she doesn't take offense. Instead, she even took out her private savings to buy prenatal medicine for the concubine, wholeheartedly considering her husband's lineage. And when her husband fell ill, she personally invited a physician to check on him every day, filled with endless concern and anxiety. A virtuous wife is a blessing. To have a wife like Lady Su, what more could a man ask for? Hearing these words, I laughed so hard that I nearly shed tears. How ridiculous. In my past life, I loved Gu Fufeng with all my heart, only to end up smeared with filth, ruining my entire family's reputation. In this life, everything I do is calculated, yet the world sings my praises, calling me the most virtuous woman in the capital. Only my mother and a few younger sisters wrote to ask if I was truly happy. Elder sister, that Gu fellow doesn't seem like a good person. If you're being mistreated, just come home. That was my second sister. And don't worry about reputation. If worst comes to worst, none of us Sioux daughters will marry. We'll stay with mother and grow old together. That was my third sister. My fourth sister was too young to write, so she clumsily drew a smiling face for me. She meant I should be happy. I smiled and drew a smiling face in reply. No matter how much unhappiness there was in the past, the future would be filled with joy. I wouldn't have to wait long. The physician had been coming to the residence for over half a month. That day, as usual, he came to report to me. I draped a cloak over my shoulders and smiled. The room feels stuffy. I was just thinking of taking a walk in the garden. Why don't you accompany me and report as we walk? The physician replied, Perfect. I noticed some flowers in the garden that can be used in medicine. I was planning to take a closer look. And so, we went to the courtyard together. I took out a packet of candied fruit and handed it to him. The physician glanced down, smiled gently, and tucked it into his sleeve. Just then, a sudden snap broke the silence. It sounded like someone had stepped on a branch. I turned around, but the garden was empty. There was no one there. The physician murmured, Strange. I thought I saw someone behind the bushes just now. I chuckled. It's fine. Whoever it was has already seen what they wanted to see. Naturally, they've left. That person hiding in the bushes was, of course, Suyu. Since becoming pregnant, she had made it a habit to stroll through the garden after meals for leisure. I had timed this encounter precisely. According to my informants, that day, as soon as Suyu saw me with the physician, she turned around in delight and bolted toward Gu Fufeng's room. Kaos, cousin. Panting, she rushed inside. Gu Fufeng had just been reprimanded by the Grand Secretary and was already in a foul mood. Why are you making such a fuss again? Suyu was so excited that even her voice trembled. No fuss at all. I just saw that wretch having a tryst with the physician in the garden. Gu Fufeng's brow twitched violently. Suyu immediately exaggerated the scene, describing how I had handed the physician candied fruit, how he had accepted it without hesitation, and how familiar and intimate we seemed. Gu Fufeng sensed her deliberate exaggeration and frowned. At the end of the day, it's just a packet of candied fruit. That doesn't prove they have an affair, does it? Suyu shook her head and clutched his hand, her voice urgent. Cousin, this alone might not be proof, but think about everything else. There must be something between them. Just think, your body isn't actually unwell, yet that wretch insists on having the physician come every single day. Isn't that suspicious? So, the so-called checkups are just an excuse. The real reason is for them to meet in secret. Gu Fufeng's expression turned ice-cold. He clenched his fists. Adultery is one of the 7 grounds for divorce. It's punishable by drowning. How dare Su Wan? Suyu pressed a hand to her belly, nearly trembling with excitement. She had thought it would take 10 years to bring me down. But heaven had blessed her. The opportunity had come so soon. Cousin, you've always favored me and have never consummated your marriage with that wretch. She must be lonely, so it's only natural she'd want to find comfort elsewhere. Gu Fufeng's face turned ashen. Whether he had feelings for me or not, I was still his official wife. For a wife to betray her husband, it was the ultimate humiliation. He called for a servant. You, take some men and throw that physician out. Make sure he never sets foot in this residence again. The servant was about to leave when Gu Fufeng suddenly yanked him back. No, Gu Fufeng muttered. After his initial fury passed, a sliver of rationality returned to him. No, they must meet. Only then can I be saved. His eyes grew brighter. He turned to the servant. I will write a letter immediately. Deliver it to the Grand Secretary. My birthday is in a few days. I want to invite the Grand Secretary and my fellow scholars to my residence for a banquet. Late at night, the servant reported everything to me. I smiled and rewarded him with a handful of silver before dismissing him. Everything had gone exactly as expected. I knew that with Gu Fufeng's mind, he would inevitably come up with a surrounding way to rescue Zhao's strategy. And in truth, it was his best option at the moment. His reputation was already in shambles. Everyone was criticizing him for marrying the noble daughter of the Su family only to neglect her. But what if? What if that noble daughter was exposed as a shameless harlot? Then Gu Fufeng would be the undisputed victim, and no one would care anymore that he had favored his concubine. So even if there was nothing between me and the physician, Gu Fufeng had to make sure there was. Sure enough, the next morning, Gu Fufeng told me about his birthday banquet, saying he would invite the Grand Secretary and his colleagues. But his excuse was, he had booked the largest restaurant in the capital, Wanghua Tower. Since it's a gathering with fellow scholars, we must drink to our heart's content. I'll likely stay at Wanghua Tower overnight and won't be coming home. Su Yu's prenatal medicine is running low, so the physician will be coming that day to write a new prescription. I'll leave it to you to entertain him. I instantly understood. Gu Fufeng was setting up the perfect stage for my affair. With the husband away and the lover visiting, he would only need to return at just the right moment with his guests, catching me red-handed. His play was impeccably arranged, even ensuring a full audience. So, I smiled sweetly and nodded. Husband, don't worry. He held my hand, and we exchanged a loving smile. This was our final act of tenderness. The drums were beating. The stage was set. It was time for the show to begin, our final, no-holds-barred battle. That night, the sky was starless and moonless. The physician sat across from me, writing a prescription. Only Chun Su and Xiao Lu were present. This was improper. By tradition, an unrelated man should not be alone with a married woman. Otherwise, there would be no explaining it away. But we did it anyway. A young servant had already gone to report to Gu Fufeng. Master, that physician went into Madame's room alone. All the other maids in the courtyard were driven out, leaving only the 2 dowry maids to serve inside. A trusted servant was even stationed outside the courtyard to prevent anyone from entering. Gu Fufeng's fingertips trembled. He closed his eyes briefly. I understand. Then, opening his eyes, he spoke in his usual gentle tone to the Grand Secretary and fellow scholars nearby. Drinking alone is dull. Why don't we admire the flowers under the moon and play a drinking game? What do you all think? The Grand Secretary had been utterly disappointed in Gu Fufeng and had initially refused to visit the Gu residence. But Gu Fufeng had written him a long, tearful letter, earnestly explaining that past events had been a misunderstanding, begging the Grand Secretary to give him one last chance to explain for the sake of their former teacher-student bond. Only then did the Grand Secretary reluctantly come. With the Grand Secretary's arrival, his disciples followed suit. These men were high-ranking officials in court, and many had brought their wives and daughters, making it a grand gathering of the capital's elite. Gu Fufeng's suggestion to enjoy the flowers outside was met with approval, and Su Yu immediately stepped forward to guide the ladies. The Grand Secretary's wife frowned. Why is a concubine entertaining guests? Where is the main wife? She turned to Gu Fufeng. The whole capital is saying that you favor a concubine over your wife. For an official, talent comes second, while character is paramount. You must never act against moral principles. Gu Fufeng bowed, wearing an expression of unspoken grievance. I have studied the classics since childhood and was raised by the teachings of sages. Naturally, I understand what teacher's wife is saying. But I am deeply devoted to Wana, yet she refuses to be close to me. Take today's birthday banquet. She should have been the one hosting, but she claimed to be unwell and insisted on staying in her courtyard to rest. I had no choice but to let Su Yu serve the guests instead. Dressed in a light-colored gauze dress, Su Yu stood pitifully by his side. I often urge my lord to visit the main wife's chambers, but she refuses to share a room with him. Sometimes I even suspect that she has someone else in her heart, which is why she... Before she could finish, Gu Fufeng snapped sternly. Enough. Su Yu immediately knelt, tears brimming in her eyes. Gu Fufeng pressed his fingers against his brow, falling silent, a tacit confirmation of Su Yu's words. The Grand Secretary's wife's expression darkened. I met that Wanner of the Su family when she was still in her maiden years. She was a well-mannered and sensible girl. How could she be as you say? There must be some misunderstanding. Gu Fufeng hurriedly cupped his hands. If that's the case, may I ask teacher's wife to persuade Wana for me? If there is a misunderstanding, Let's resolve it today. If we can live in harmony afterward, that would be the best birthday gift I could ask for. Su quickly echoed. Yes. If the Lord and the lady reconcile, I will no longer bear the shame of being called a scheming seductress. I shall lead the way to Madame's quarters. At this point, the Grand Secretary's wife could no longer refuse, so she led the way to my room. Several high-ranking ladies followed her, while the men, guided by Gu Fufeng, remained in the courtyard beside my chamber, admiring the blooming crabapple trees. The audience was finally in place. Su Yu and Gu Fufeng exchanged a glance, excitement flashing in their eyes. Then, Su pushed open my door. A sharp scream rang out. Madam, how could you, with the physician? Hearing her cry, Gu Fufeng rushed in at once. The room erupted in chaos, voices clashing like boiling water. I looked at the flickering lamp flame, a quiet smile appearing on my lips. Finally, it was here. The physician was dragged to the ground, bound by the servants. I was surrounded by a crowd. A sea of noble women encircled me, while the men, though unable to enter, gathered outside, listening intently. After all, a scandal of this magnitude. Who wouldn't want to witness the spectacle? Kneeling on the floor, my face pale, I looked at Gu Fufeng with tearful eyes. Husband, there must be a misunderstanding. I have no improper relationship with a physician. Before Gu Fufeng could respond, Xi spoke up first. For days, she had been scorned as a shameless seductress, while I had been praised as a virtuous wife. Now, with almost every noblewoman in the capital present, she was eager to show them what kind of woman this so-called virtuous wife truly was. No improper relationship. Su Yu's voice was sharp. 2 days ago, I personally saw you handing a box of candied fruit to the physician. He accepted it with a smile, such an intimate gesture. I froze, staring at Gu Fufeng in disbelief. Husband, is this why you suspect me? It was my fault for not explaining sooner. The physician lost his wife last year, leaving behind an 8-year-old daughter. She has played in my courtyard a few times and loves the candied fruit I make. So, every time the physician visits, I prepare some for him to take home to his daughter. Still restrained on the ground, the physician pleaded, My lord, the candied fruit truly was for my daughter, Shijia. She lost her mother at a young age, and Madam was merely showing kindness. Please don't misunderstand her. Silence fell over the crowd. Even Gu Fufeng seemed momentarily stunned. For a fleeting moment, he might have realized that I truly had no illicit affair with the physician. But there was no turning back now. It had come this far, whether there was an affair or not, there had to be one. He glanced at Su Yu, who immediately understood. She raised her voice. Madam, how eloquent you are, twisting words and avoiding the real issue. Forget the candied fruit. The fact remains, you skipped the Lord's birthday banquet to meet a man in private. Do you take us all for fools? Tears welled in my reddened eyes as I gazed at Gu Fufeng. Husband, you told me the Grand Secretary would be drinking at Wangyue Tower and that I shouldn't go. I have not left my courtyard all day. I didn't even know the banquet was moved to the residence. I stumbled to my feet. It was indeed improper of me, as the lady of the house, to neglect my duties. I will make arrangements immediately. Gu Fufeng struck me to the ground. I looked up at him in shock. His eyes were bloodshot. Wanner, stop evading the truth. I don't blame you for skipping the banquet, but you are a noblewoman. You know full well that meeting an outsider alone is a grave offense.
Why?
Why were you alone with him? How am I supposed to believe you're innocent? Through my tear-blurred vision, I stared at Gu Fufeng. What an actor. The bloodshot eyes, the trembling voice filled with heartbreak. Who wouldn't believe he was a husband devastated by betrayal? I suppressed the waves of coldness surging in my heart and sobbed as I defended myself. I was never alone with the physician. I left Chun Su and Xia Lu in the room. Su Yu seemed to have anticipated my excuse. She immediately let out a cold snort, interrupting me. Who doesn't know that those two are your personal maids? Keeping them there hardly counts as having others present. There are so many servants, maids, and elderly attendants in Madame's courtyard. If you weren't trying to have an illicit affair with a physician, there would have been no need to send them all away. I shook my head, tears streaming down like rain. I know I mishandled this matter, but I truly had no other choice. There is nothing improper between the physician and me. The reason I cleared the room was because what we were discussing absolutely could not be known by others. I feared loose tongues, so I made sure no one else was around.
Suyu sneered.
In broad daylight, what could possibly be so unspeakable? With tears in my eyes, I looked at Gu Fufeng. Husband, can I tell you in private? It really cannot be said aloud. Gu Fufeng remained silent. At this point, there was no turning back. If he couldn't completely crush me today, all his efforts would have been for nothing. After a long silence, Gu Fufeng finally spoke. Wan, if there is still any bond left between us as husband and wife, then tell me the truth right now, in front of everyone. What exactly did you and the physician talk about that no one else could know? If you can't give me a convincing answer, I'm afraid I will have no choice but to charge you with adultery, one of the 7 grounds for divorce. I felt as if all my strength had been drained. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the ground. So be it, I murmured. In that case, physician, you tell them. The physician had long been waiting for this moment. He struggled to lift his head and, in a voice that everyone could hear, declared, Lord Gu suffers from congenital impotence. Silence. A deathly silence. Everyone was stunned. The wind rustled through the air, but the only sound that remained was the physician's voice. A month ago, Madame entrusted me with taking Lord Gu's pulse and adjusting his diet. But during the diagnosis, I discovered that Lord Gu appears to have a congenital defect. He is incapable of fathering children. Kneeling beside him, I pretended to sob, but inside, I was laughing coldly. I had known this in my past life. I was married to Gu Fufeng for 10 years without bearing a child. On the letter of divorce he wrote, one of the 7 grounds listed was my supposed infertility. After being reborn, I secretly sought medical advice and confirmed that there was nothing wrong with my body. The problem had to lie with Gu Fufeng. The physician continued speaking. This is a grave matter. Not only is it a severe blow to a man's dignity, but it also concerns the lineage of the household. Lord Gu has been in low spirits lately, and if he were to suffer such a devastating blow, I feared he would fall gravely ill. That is why Madame and I decided not to inform him immediately. Madame summoned me here today to discreetly ask if there was a cure for congenital impotence. I had already informed her, physicians are not deities. Such a condition cannot be treated. Everything Madame has done was to protect Lord Gu's dignity. There was never any illicit affair between us. The physician's words finally came to an end. I lifted my head and clutched the hem of Gu Fufeng's robe. Husband.
He ignored me.
The room was eerily quiet. Gu Fufeng's gaze, along with everyone else's, landed on a single person. Suyu. She stood there, dumbfounded by the sudden turn of events. Her light-colored dress outlined her figure, and her slightly rounded belly was already showing. Since Gu Fufeng was incapable of fathering children, then whose child was she carrying? The silence dragged on. Then, the sharp, piercing sound of metal rang out. Gu Fufeng had drawn the sword of the Imperial Guard's commander. Chaos erupted. People wanted to stop him, but no one dared to. He charged towards Suyu, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. This time, he wasn't pretending. He was truly on the verge of collapse. The tip of the sword pressed against Suyu's throat. Gu Fufeng seemed blind to everything else. In his maddened gaze, there was only her face, dewy like a lotus blossom. She was his cousin, his childhood sweetheart. The sword trembled, just like his voice. I did so much, suffered so much pain, all to love and protect you, to give you honor and dignity, so that you would never be alone again, never be mistreated. And you? Why did you betray me? Suyu seemed to know she was doomed. With death at her doorstep, she lifted her eyes. A single tear fell, followed by a twisted smile. Do you really love me?
No, cousin.
I know you too well. You only love yourself. Now, I can finally tell you the truth. Suyu raised her gaze and enunciated each word like a dagger to the heart. I never once found pleasure with you in bed. The blade pierced through her chest, and a spray of blood erupted. The women screamed, some fainting from the shock. Amidst the chaos, Gu Fufeng stared at Suyu's lifeless eyes, his voice hollow and dazed. Why did you do this to me? I schemed against everyone except you. You were the only one I was truly sincere to. Madame Go, still composed, snapped coldly. And what about Wanner's sincerity? Why did you scheme against her? I immediately covered my face, sobbing. Gu Fufeng let go of the bloodied sword. He looked at Suyu's corpse, then turned to me. For a long time. Suddenly, as if struck by a revelation, his eyes filled with an overwhelming realization. Step by step, he walked toward me, his face contorted like a demon from hell. Suwon, you knew all along, didn't you? This was your scheme. I gazed at Gu Fufeng. He was indeed intelligent. Unfortunately, in this moment, his intelligence would be his greatest torment. The more he understood, the deeper his agony. Sure enough, countless emotions flickered through Gu Fufeng's eyes: shock, regret, hatred, an endless, chaotic storm. His entire body trembled. He understood. He understood everything. I watched his expression, a sense of exhilaration creeping up on me, almost to the point of trembling, though my face remained full of tears as I cried out. Hubby, what are you saying? We are one. Your good fortune is mine too. No one hopes for your well-being more than I do. Then, taking advantage of the fact that everyone was on the periphery, I rushed toward him, adopting a near-embrace stance, and whispered in his ear, Yes, I already knew. Gu Fufeng, you've wronged me, deceived me, and used me. I've known it all along. So what I wanted was for you to lose everything. To be mocked by thousands, cursed by millions, with no place to rest in death. I let go of Gu Fufeng and stared into his eyes. He looked at me blankly, before suddenly lunging toward the nearby sword. You wicked woman, I'll take you down with me to hell. At the moment Gu Fufeng swung the sword toward me, an arrow shot from behind, hitting his eye dead center. I stood up and dusted myself off. Gu Fufeng, in his frenzy, didn't notice. When he killed Suyu, the commander of the Imperial Guard's troops had already arrived, with arrows ready to shoot. If Gu Fufeng harmed anyone further, the arrows would be released. This was why I had approached him. Watching Gu Fufeng's body lying in a pool of blood, I suddenly thought, in this world, there's blind loyalty and blind filial piety. Perhaps there's also such a thing as blind wisdom. So, like a truly foolish wise wife, I stomped my foot and began to sob loudly. Hubby, don't die. I don't want you to die. Heaven heard my prayer and didn't let Gu Fufeng die immediately. He was left with one blind eye and thrown into prison. The verdict from the Dali Temple came out: murder, first killing a concubine, then attempting to kill his wife. It was so shocking that he was sentenced to death after interrogation. A bit unfortunate, though. Thinking of the feeling of being immersed in a pig cage from my past life, I actually wanted him to suffer more before dying. It's said that Gu Fufeng was still restless in prison. He screamed that everything was my scheme. No one believed him. Everyone said I was a model wife, and my only misfortune was marrying such a man. I maintained my image as the virtuous wife, and the night before the execution, I brought him a food box and bade him a tearful farewell. After several months, Gu Fufeng had grown as thin as a skeleton, no longer the refined scholar I had met in Jiangnan. I took out a jug of wine. This is spring water brew, crisp and delicious, your favorite from before. I specially brought a flask. Gu Fufeng glared at me with his hollow eye. Suwan, are you here to ask for a divorce letter? I'm telling you, I won't give it to you. When I die, you'll be a criminal's wife, and in this life, you'll be dragged down by me, and we'll both go to hell together. I poured the wine slowly, drinking a cup myself. Gu Lang, you think too much. Beijing has been peaceful for a long time. There's been no turmoil. Your actions that day even alarmed the emperor and the empress dowager. Upon hearing of this, the empress dowager sighed, saying that I was so considerate and virtuous, yet met with such misfortune. If someone like me, who's virtuous and good, can't have a good ending, it will make every woman in the world heartbroken. So, she has decreed to adopt me as her goddaughter. As for your marriage to me, since it was never consummated, the Empress Dowager said it doesn't count. I'm still an unmarried woman. Of course, this is a bit far-fetched, but since it's the Empress Dowager's order, you, as a scholar, should understand that customs and laws must give way to power. So, now that I'm the eldest daughter of the Su family, as well as the Empress Dowager's goddaughter, and famous for my virtue, suitors have been flocking to ask for my hand. I suppose I'll need to choose carefully. With every word I spoke, Gu Fufeng spat out a mouthful of blood. He pointed at me. You're a venomous woman? I smiled. Gulang, people are far more terrifying than venomous creatures. After speaking, I poured the entire jug of spring water brew into the soil, not leaving a drop. Tomorrow is the execution. I'll toast you in advance. Turning, I left, ignoring Gu Fufeng's hoarse cries and curses behind me. I never looked back. The wolf in the mountains becomes savage when it gains strength. Fortunately, I finally escaped the wolf's jaws. There will be future blessings.
The end.